Hello everyone and welcome to the show. Today's video is part 4 of a 9-part video series where I dive into each of the 9 launch titles that were available for the Atari Video Computer System, which is what the Atari 2600 was known as when it was first introduced in September of 1977. Today we hit the racetrack with the first racing game for the VCS titled Indy 500. And that is the topic for today's video.
Atari's new video game is more fun to play.
Atari's new Indy 500 is more fun because it's so action-packed.
From Ultra Pong to our new programmable video computer system, Atari's got more original games, and that's more fun for you.
Indy 500 is a 1977 racing game and one of the 9 launch titles for the Atari VCS. It was programmed by Ed Riddle. This was the only game he ever programmed, and he left Atari shortly afterwards to pursue his true calling, which was hardware design. It is themed around the Indianapolis 500 and is based on Atari's arcade games Grand Track 10 of 1974, Crash and Score of 1975, Indy 800 of 1975, Indy 4 of 1976, and Key Game Sprint 2 also of 1976. Sears Telegame's version of Indy 500 is called Race. Could you possibly pick a more lame name? Okay, maybe Car. Let's take a look at the first 4 renamed Sears games: Tank Plus, Target Fun, Outer Space, and now Race. They must have had quite the think tank over at Sears' renaming department. Cliff Spawn once again did the marvelous box artwork for this game. He really does capture the excitement of a racetrack. Each game comes with a set of 2 driving controllers which are needed to play the game. It will not work with the joysticks or the paddle controllers which were included with the console. Let's talk controllers. The Atari 2600 came with 2 CX40 joysticks. It has 8 directions and an action button, which a lot of people call the fire button. I can't think of anything that represents the retro gaming genre more than this. The console also came with 1 set of CX30 paddle controllers. These are wired together as a pair with a single DB9 connector. Since the console has 2 ports, if you bought another pair of paddles, you could potentially have 4 players playing at the same time. Warlords was an excellent example of a 4-paddle game from the era. The paddles are analog potentiometers. We can look at the range of motion by putting it all the way to the end here. Put a marker on here. And that's the other end. So it's about 330 degrees. A little tip for you: when you get your paddle controllers, you might want to put a label on the opposite side. It allows you to tell one from the other. The Indy 500 game came with 2 of these CX20 driving controllers. They're still readily available on places like eBay for around $15 to $20 a piece. Externally, they are identical to the paddle controllers. There are 2 main differences. One is the driving controllers are 1 per port instead of 2, and the stickers on the front are different, of course. You have a race car with the word driving on the driving controller, and a pair of rackets and paddle on the paddle controllers. Also, unlike the paddle controllers, the knob will continue to turn indefinitely in either direction. It has no stops. It is a rotary switch spinner using phase-shifted quadrature encoding. In other words, this one is digital, this one is analog. Atari never took advantage of the driving controller for another game. However, fast forward a few decades later, and there were several games that were adapted to use it, including Omega Race, Asteroids, Sprint Master, and the homebrews Thrust Plus and Stella Sketch. Omega Matrix once again has provided a very slick graphical menu system to help choose the version of the game you want to play. It uses the driving controller to navigate the menus and the fire button to select or change an option. This can be found free on the Atari Age website. Although it claims to have 14 games, this number treats each of the variations as a separate game. There are actually 3 unique game modes. The first 4 variations involve you racing another player or a single player racing against the clock. I will be showing the one-player variations, which are called time trials in the manual. You have 60 seconds to perform as many laps as possible. The laps are displayed on the top left and a timer countdown on the right. In the 2-player games, the first player getting 25 laps wins. Hitting another player or any boundary of the track will slow you down. The first 2 variations use the easier track. The other 2 use a more complex track and a higher top speed. As you can tell, this one is a good bit more difficult. You have to slow down to take those hairpin curves, and with a higher top speed and another car to avoid, this will provide both players with a nice challenge. The next 2 variations are called crash and score. The object is to crash into as many boxes as you can in 60 seconds. The boxes appear randomly on the screen one at a time. The playfield also has passages on the top and bottom. Enter these and you will immediately reappear on the opposite side. On the 2-player version, the first player to crash into 50 boxes wins. The next 2 variations are labeled as tag and are for 2 players only. The car that is not blinking is it, and the object is to tag your opponent. When you do so, the roles become reversed. You score 1 point every second you avoid being tagged. The first player to gain 99 points wins. The first variation uses the easier barrier chase track, while this variation uses the more complex motor hunt track with higher top speeds. The last 4 variations are ice race. The rules are the same for the first 4 races, with either 25 laps for 2 players or 60-second time trials for a single player. The fun part here is racing with ice physics. It is quite entertaining to slide and drift around the turns. The first two are the easier ice sprint track, and the last two are the slightly more curvy ice rally track. All of the 9 launch titles were 2K, which doesn't leave room for much more than basic gameplay. It is surprising how much Indy 500 had implemented in that small amount of memory, but it does have a limited number of tracks. In 2003, Steve Englehart created an alternate tracks hack, giving you another 5 tracks to race around in. In 2004, Gustavo Delgado developed a hack called Indy 500 XE. It doubled the size to 4K and features 16 new tracks that were chosen as part of the Indy 500 XE track design contest on Atari Age. It uses double resolution tracks that allow for more detailed levels. It has several wraparound tracks that include some things you might recognize from other titles, like Fish and Derby, Berserk, E.T., Space Invaders, and Skydiver. Let's try a lap around some of the more interesting tracks. Both of these hacks are free on the Atari Age website, so check them out. In conclusion, the first time I was able to play this was for the series, and I must say I am quite impressed. It's a very solid racing game, and even more fun with a human opponent. Well, that's it for today's video. Have you played this one before, and what are your thoughts? Have you ever tried out the driving controllers? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like and subscribe buttons, and hit that bell icon if you want to be notified of upcoming videos, like the ones for this 9-part launch title series. Take care, guys.